Hello, this is the latest episode of Freedom, as in Inkululeko. And so today I thought I would talk about an interview that Thabo Mbeki, the former president, did with Rapport. It just came out today, this morning, in fact. And so, like, he made a couple of statements that were interesting, to say the least. And so now he's on the campaign trail, campaigning for the ANC. But from the statements he makes, it seems that he shouldn't really be doing this. But anyway, I'll leave it to the former president. I just found these statements interesting. Okay, so the reports interview, one of the things that the points that the person who wrote the article makes is that Mbeki led the ANC to a majority of 69.7% in 2004, which was a historic high for the party, and the economy was growing by more than 35% when he left. So these are all true, and it sort of indicates that with economic growth comes political support. And so, if for any party that wants to get a huge majority at the polls, all they need to do is get good economic growth going, people getting jobs and all of those things. And so the ANC did, under Thabo Mbeki, the ANC did this by reforming, like increasing the level of economic freedom in the country by interfering less in the economy, deregulating, lowering taxes, and so on, and so on and so on. And so this is a good point to make. Just like more economic freedom equals more economic growth, and then this will equal more economic support, more political support. Okay. And so this another snippet that's in the article was that Thabo Mbeki's ousting was premised on the notion that he was aloof and that his government's growth, employment and distribution policy implemented in 1996 was neoliberal, while Zuma was supposedly sensitive to the conditions of the working class. So we see this attack from the coming a lot from people who align ideologically left of the political spectrum, that so-called policies that tend to increase economic freedom are neoliberal, and that they are anti-poor. But what we saw under Thabo Mbeki was that the opposite was true, because those same policies created jobs. They, no, not to the extent that we would want, because there were still labor laws on the books that were stifling employment creation, but to a greater extent than what we have now. And they also lifted a lot of people out of poverty and allowed the government to, because of the growing economy, to get taking more in taxes, and then which allowed them to launch a social safety net. Okay, so the third snippet was that this is a quote from Thabo Mbeki. You cannot run on borrowed money forever, because in the end we would be taxing people in order to pay the banks. There will not be any money to build schools and clinics and all of that. These people who are talking about the 1996 class project would say no, it is neoliberalism. The proper management of the fiscal has become a problem again now. And this is we see this happening. This is all true, because now the government has not only managed to settle the fiscals with more than 60%, which is heading towards 60% of debt relative to GDP, coming down from the less than 20% when Thabo Mbeki left office, and the budget surplus. Now we have a persistent budget deficit of around 200 billion rands a year. And so it just shows a complete failure to manage the fiscus. And then the government is now trying to increase taxes more and more, and they are failing miserably, because there are just not enough taxes to be raised in the economy when it's suffering like this. And so this is where we are in a debt spiral in every sense of the word, economic and fiscal. Tompeg also comments on the lack of fiscal discipline that has become prevalent in government. So the quote there is: Mpegi remembers a senior civil servant in the presidency telling him that the number of staff in the president and deputy president's office grew from 300 when he left to 1,000 by 2015. I said, referring to Thabo Mbeki, what do they do? And he said, nothing. They came to work and they play patience on the computer and solitaire. So this is one of the things that will indicate a government that just doesn't care how taxpayers' monies are spent. They hire people for the sake of hiring them for whatever political reason that gives them. Like if they maybe they'll hire someone because it strengthens their position within the ANC, not because the person has a role to play in government or can add value there. So this is we see this happening a lot with the current government. Okay, and then the fifth snippet is on the NDP. Thabo Mbeki says the correct way to have done it would have been to do a review of your economic policies since 1994. Did they work? That review was never done. I asked the people who were working on it, did you do that? And they said no. The consequence is that this vision that you are elaborating is going to be a dumb sack, which which seems to be fair enough because if you look at the NDP, I'm not sure that the government itself understands what they are supposed to be doing there. I mean, I don't remember that any review was done before the NTP was launched. It seemed to be a project that was just launched almost from out of the blue, and then the proposals were made, and then which themselves were never implemented. But this is I think it's a good point from the former president in terms of doing a review because a lot of things from 1994 did work, and a lot of things didn't. So one of the things that didn't work was the labor laws that we still have on the books that held people back from being able to access employment. The education policy also held the country back because what happened was the public schools were at the mercy of labor unions, and they were not really teaching the right things. Standards were lowered, and there was nothing really that the government can do. And so those two crucial things, labor policy and education policy, which tends to feed into economic policy as well. So those two things would have been a priority for in terms of the review that Thabo Mbeki talks about here, and maybe he should have done the review while he was still in government because he had 2 terms, or almost 2 terms to do it, and so I would say that he has to take some blame here because while he did a lot of things right in the economy, but he still did some things wrong, and two of those two of the main things I would say was labor policy and education policy, because the labor market is too regulated in South Africa, and a lot of people are poor for it, and the same goes for the education policy. And then he talks about the ANC's decision to go ahead and change the constitution to allow expropriation without compensation. And now he says, if you put it in the context of the history of ANC policy, this is a big radical departure. Now, if you make departures of that kind, surely you must discuss them properly. A decision was rushed through in the final hours of the Nasrec conference. People in the ANC like referring to the Freedom Charter, and it is very specific on the land question, that the land will be shared among those who work it. It does not say black, white, settler, no settler. So has the ANC now departed from this position? And so I get the point that the former president is making here about the ANC and the Freedom Charter and this non-racial nature of the Freedom Charter. But I think he knows as much as anyone that the Freedom Charter can be interpreted in a few ways. One of those ways is what he's talking about here, where it's a non-racial document, and it's talking about how people should be able to people who work the land should share the land regardless of race. And I assume that some of those people sharing the land will be people who own it, and some of them sharing the land will be people who are workers on the land. So that's one way to interpret it, but the other way to interpret it would be as the people, referring to basically the lower or working classes being able to share the land. And in terms of the South African Communist parties and now the ANC's National Democratic Revolution, that specifically would mean the people who are classed as being the oppressed, and these people are defined as being black and Africans in particular in the NDR documents. And so I think I see what the former president is trying to do here, trying to put forward a more a less damaging version interpretation of the Freedom Charter. But and I wish him all the I wish him all the luck in the world within the ANC to try and put forward this vision. but it seems that people are just not willing to accept this. People have sort of accepted the SACP's version of the Freedom Charter, which refers to black people as being the oppressed, and white people basically being settler colonizers. And so that needs to be, I suppose that needs to be an ideological fight that the ANC has with itself. And then the seventh snippet I got from the article was a quote from the former president where he says, "Populist policies are only avoided when existing policy examined and amended in a rational way," Mbeki says. "Instead, race becomes the focus." And I take the point there, because if you look at the past, at the policies under Mbeki's government, a lot of things did work, which was then subsequently thrown out for no reason, in an irrational way, in a sense, because there was no review done, there was no sort of assessment done of how these things had worked relative to the goals that had been set. So it seems that if if you had a government that really cared about achieving its goals and really was trying to make things better for South Africans, then they would look at these policies and say, okay, these are the things we have changed. Just to give you an indicator of how much things have changed since Thabo Mbeki's term, the economic freedom of the world ranking for South Africa under Thabo Mbeki was around the 40s. I think at some point we were at number 42. And then after he left, we are now at number 110 in the world in terms of economic freedom. So that's just one indicator that's how much things have changed and the economy has worsened. And so the changes have mostly been irrational, because they have made things worse for South Africans. They haven't changed things in a way to make things much better for those South Africans. We are now GDP growth is now hovering around 1% or thereabouts, and inflation is around 5%. We have unemployment increasing daily. We now have close to 10 million people unemployed in the country, and so it seems like the change that took place within the ANC and later in the country's government has just made things worse, because of it was not done in a systematic, rational way. If they were wanting to make changes, they should have examined all policies rationally, looked at labor policy and realized how damaging it was to employment and so on. So the 8 quotes that comes from the article is, where you had land restitution, we noticed that in the majority of cases where the claim had been settled, the majority of people said, I prefer the money. This particular experience of people winning land claims and preferring to take money is saying something about the attitude to land. Now this seems to me to be another good point to make, is that we know from the research that has been done by the likes of the IRR and even the I forget the other organization that did research on this issue, but we know that from all the research that has been done, the South Africans don't seem to really want land. This notion of land hunger only exists in academics' minds. It seems it doesn't really exist when you talk to people who poor people and people who live on the ground. And now you do have the need for housing or accommodation in urban areas, and that can be handled in a variety of ways. One of the measures that can be taken is making the zoning requirements in cities to be less onerous. So people should be able to build where, if you own a piece of property where previously you wouldn't have been allowed to build a residential development in that particular area because it was classed as a business or a commercial area, then we should be looking at allowing people to do more of those sort of things. Another thing that we should be looking at are the many stringent regulations put on landlords. So if you are a tenant and you are a tenant for a particular landlord, and then you refuse to move out of the house, even when you're not paying rent, it's too hard to get that person out of your property, and this will obviously tend to make landlords less amenable to getting people, or less willing to getting people to rent their units or their flats that they have available. And so one of the things that should be looked at is making it easier, basically making it just contingent on the contracts that the landlord signs with the tenant. So if the contract says under these conditions, then I will be able to kick you out as the landlord, then you should be able to be kicked out. It shouldn't be a long bureaucratic process where basically it can take up to 6 months or even a year to kick someone out who's not paying rent. That's just ridiculous. It should be if you're not adhering to the contract of the tenant, then you should be able to the landlord should be able to kick you out. And conversely, if the landlord breaks his part of the agreement, then they should be you should be able to claim the damages according to the terms of the contract. And so this is one of the things where government just needs to get out of the contract signed between landlords and tenants, and this will tend to make housing more available. And the zoning issue as well, make it more easy for people to use their property in whatever way they want, in cities, in towns, or whatever, and you will tend to get more houses because the people who are building on their property will respond to the demand, and so we will provide whatever is being demanded, instead of artificial restrictions being put by municipal zoning saying that you can't build this particular type of property here because, I don't know, or reasons, whatever, or town planning, whatever it is. So the last point that or the last snippet that was made in the article is that the reporter says, asked if he still believes the ANC should aim to grasp all levels of power in society, knowing what we now know, with what we know now, he says, no, I don't think so. So this is one of the ANC's long time goals since basically they took power, to grasp all levels of power in society. This means not just in government, but in the media, culturally, in churches, in civil society, etc., etc., etc. And so now it's interesting that Thabo Mbeki now seems to be saying that this should no longer be a goal of the ANC, because he doesn't really go into his reasons why he believes this now. But when it comes specifically to the civil service, he says he acknowledges that the policy that he was part of implementing, or that he implemented, cadre deployment, did a lot to harm the civil service. And so now I think he's sort of having buyer's remorse now. He has seen the kind of policies he has championed and how they've turned out wrong, and now he's saying that maybe these policies are not a good idea and they should be dropped. And I think most of us would, listening to this even, would agree with him that policies like cadre deployment, taking control, having one party taking control of every part of society, is a very bad idea. It makes society less robust. It defeats all valid criticism of the current government. It creates a society of sheep. And we know that in South Africa, one of the best things that's allowed the country to resist or to oppose the disastrous presidency of Jacob Zuma was the strong civil society that we had. And one of the best things that allows the country to resist some of the terrible policies the government puts forward is a strong civil society. Expropriation without compensation is a great example of that. Just seeing how civil society has stood up and opposed this damaging policy. And so I think Thabo Mbeki is now seeing that this policy that the ANC adopted and that he was part of implementing as well is just turned out horribly wrong for the country, and it needs to be defeated. And I hope, in the context of him campaigning for the ruling party, that he will be telling them these things and pushing for these changes, and saying, hey, some of these things that we once believed no longer work, and we should change tack. But overall, I tend to agree with the president, especially when it comes to the economy, on things like EWC and so on. And so I hope that his party, now that he used to be influential in, will also listen to him and maybe make the necessary changes. And thank you for listening in. Thanks. Bye.